In the early 1960s, 19-year-old Bob Dylan arrives in New York with his guitar and revolutionary talent, destined to change the course of American music. Forming his most intimate relationships during his rise to fame, he grows restless with the folk movement, making a controversial choice that reverberates worldwide. A Complete Unknown is directed by James Mangold and stars Timothée Chalamet, Monica Barbaro, Elle Fanning, Edward Norton, and many more. So Jeffrey, what do you think about A Complete Unknown?
With me being like a giant Bob Dylan fan, I feel like this could really go one of two ways for me. It could either be true adoration or it could be completely disproportionate criticism that's totally unfair. I did not enjoy the trailers leading up to this movie. I saw the trailers and I did not think this looked good. I was very, very concerned. And Bob Dylan is like kind of a hero of mine.
Well, what about the trailer did you not like?
It just felt like...
Contrived?
It felt contrived. It felt like it was going too hard for inspirational stuff. It felt like it was making the whole narrative that was true into this very cookie cutter biopic thing, like an Elvis movie, like the Elvis movie.
Okay.
I am happy to say that I really, really liked this movie. I thought it was great. There's a mystery and a mystique to Bob Dylan that I think if you give too much explanation, a lot of what makes him interesting starts to fall away. So I was really concerned that this film was going to give us the Bob Dylan origin story, and I really didn't want that. At the same time, how do you make a movie about a mysterious guy without explaining a lot of those things? And oddly, I think that this film walked that tightrope very, very well. So much of what it does right is almost basically a concert film. It focuses on the music. It lets the music tell the story. A lot of times it's imitation and recreation of these really huge moments and famous live performances in Bob Dylan's career. And really the only thing in way of dramatic tension is a bit of this love triangle and then a little bit of the art versus commerce or art versus what people want me to do versus what I want to do type of dramatic tension. They're so good at recreating these iconic performances and building a world around folk music, especially in the West Village at the time, that I was very, very moved by it. But at the same time, I do think I have to reckon with whether this is like a bit of a hollow exercise. I'll probably talk about that a little more later, but as a Bob Dylan fan, going to see an imitation of Bob Dylan perform songs that I really love without learning too much, I don't know like what that really does ultimately, or if this is ultimately like a good movie. But I loved it. I had a great time. I had a really, really good time.
That was definitely the first thought I had coming out of the theater is whether you had a good time or not, because I know you're such a huge Bob Dylan fan. And it's also something that separates us with regards to how we view the movie, because I knew of Bob Dylan growing up, but I never really engaged with his music very seriously. And that was until I met you, in which you've just been playing Bob Dylan in our house since I literally met you. So
I know it's funny. The idea of like seeing this movie, it's just like, oh, go listen to Bob Dylan for 2 hours. I'm like, that's what we do during dinner every night is just Bob Dylan playing all the time.
What's interesting about this perspective, you were talking about how maybe some could perceive the movie as a bit hollow, especially people who are fans of Bob Dylan, because you're not really getting anything new here. But for me, personally speaking, I only have this connection to his music specifically through you. So I don't really know who he is. Beyond that, I've heard that he's a bit of an enigma and nobody could really make heads or tails of him as a person in general. But from that perspective, I don't know. I felt like I got a lot here about Bob Dylan. I think he's someone who really values his independence and control over his life and his art form, showing this disconnect between him as an artist and the production companies and the world that he's inhabiting. There's this world where, with the producers and the record companies, they're so strict about how they manage and market artists. The impression I got through this film was that his craft and his music is the most important thing, and that coming from a place that is very true and honest. So I think he values these things more than he does the hoopla of the industry. I think the movie did a great job at showing that for somebody who didn't really know about his character or his persona.
Playing real people is always so tricky. You want to be recognizable. You want to encapsulate what makes that person that person. But it's a very thin line between playing an actual character and doing like an SNL impersonation. Even Austin Butler, as good as he was in the Elvis movie, and I think he was pretty good, that is a little more towards the SNL impersonation scale of things. The way Chalamet plays Bob Dylan, he encapsulates Bob Dylan very, very well, but I think at the same time, he plays it kind of close to the chest. Again, as we're talking about, Bob Dylan is like a mythos, he is a myth. He is a guy with a lot of mystique around him. He is an enigma. So to play him, I think a bit more restrained is what makes a lot of sense. But if you close your eyes, it doesn't really sound like Timothée Chalamet. There's such studied and mannered affectations here that it's utterly convincing. His motivations as a character are always a little mysterious to the audience. Like, he has this habit of just showing up at people's apartments and writing music, and they're like, what are you doing here? We're not given the backstory of like, oh, he was mad at his mom, so he started going to work at a circus or blah, blah, blah. We get like little bits and pieces of things, but that's not the importance of what this film is about. The film, very admirably, it does tell us a little bit about Bob Dylan's persona, but at the same time focuses primarily on what he's doing as an artist and how he's able to get to his artistic progression throughout the 60s, which is as varied and interesting as almost anybody's progression in popular music. Another thing I like about the movie is they don't hesitate to show when he can be an
Yes.
and some characters, in fact, call him. And I think it's true.
When you were talking about the film kind of being a little thin on the details, I saw the film's focus on the music as the detail. I feel like so much what I got from the film was so much about Bob Dylan comes through in his music and his art. It's the way that the film contextualizes the music with the time period. Scenes of the civil rights movement happening during this, which he is somewhat a part of, or he makes a point to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, he's literally at the March on Washington.
So he's on the right side of history in this regard, but the way that is being intertwined with certain songs that he's writing at the time, I think says a lot about where his headspace is and where the lyrics are coming from. Maybe so many people are so focused on who Bob Dylan is outside of his music and his personal life, when really who he is just right there under everybody's noses, perhaps. I don't know. That's just what I got from the film.
I really admire Bob Dylan's lyrics, and I think he's an amazing lyricist. But as far as a music listener, I'm not a giant lyrics guy. Like, I'm more of like a rhythm guy. I really like to listen to the music and get stuck into the instrumentals. But listening to Highway 61 Revisited after this film, it's almost impossible not to listen to that album now as like a giant FU to folk music.
Yeah.
And just him being like, stop making me do stupid stuff. I want to play rock music. Like, I want to do this. A variety of contexts in your life could color the lyrics of Bob Dylan songs, and that's kind of what makes them so great.
I completely agree. I want to jump back just briefly to Timothée Chalamet because there was something I wanted to mention earlier that I didn't get the chance to mention, but he worked years on this role to learn how to play the guitar. Well, I think he already did play guitar. I'm really bad at enunciating my words. Maybe I have a brain problem.
You have ADHD. Your thoughts are so cacophonous that you can't get your words out fast enough to match your thoughts, right? So that's why your thoughts end up stumbling. Your words end up stumbling over each other.
I have ADHD.
Oh, wow. That was a mic drop.
Are we leaving this in there?
Yeah, I think you should. I think you should. I think it's funny.
Okay. To learn how to play the guitar and play all these Bob Dylan songs, to sing. I remember we were listening to a Bob Dylan track on the way home. I was closing my eyes and I was just like, oh my God. It could almost be Timothée Chalamet.
The other thing too, and this is the hard part, is Timothée Chalamet has to play Bob Dylan coming up with melodies. He's kind of playing guitar haphazardly, trying to find the melody, and then he finds the melody, and then he has to play it perfectly on stage. He has to learn how to play every part of the songwriting exercise, which I think is a lot harder than it sounds.
Mad respect and props just for the dedication that it takes as an actor to not only act this part in this role, but to sing it as well.
There's like a logical and intellectual wrestling that I'm doing because on an emotional level, I absolutely love this movie, but with so much focusing on the music and so much recreating of like iconography in American music, I have to ask how valuable this actually is. If this is just like nostalgia bait for me, because now I'm old. Like, now I'm the people that need nostalgia. But in some ways, like, this film feels tailor-made for Bob Dylan fans, but I'm not sure that makes it a great film. I'm not sure if that makes it a story worth telling. This is a flaw with the film because it just kept happening. Is there's many scenes of people hearing Bob Dylan sing and they just start going. It must have happened like 20 times. The first time it happened was with Pete Seeger and Edward Norton. And he hears him in the bathroom. He's brushing his teeth.
And he walks in all slowly.
And then there's even the scene with, I think it's Joan Baez. She hears him off the street and she's like... And she walks down to the club. It happens so often that, like, once I clocked it on the third time, it happens another 12 times. And it's like, I think Bob Dylan is a genius too, but this is like a lot of people staring at genius, you know? That's when I first got going in my head. I was like, is this a hollow exercise? Bob Dylan's amazing. You know he's amazing. I know he's amazing. Come watch him be amazing. And is that really, like, valuable? Am I a different person because I saw this film?
To be honest, I feel that way about most biopics, so I'm not sure this is anything new for me. Like, what I expect of a biopic is really to just maybe engage with somebody's life a little bit and possibly learn something. But I've always seen these types of films as more entertainment than I have as something really meaningful or impactful. I'm trying to think of a biopic that was actually extremely meaningful to informing something about my life or society or something.
Yeah.
I don't think it exists.
Kind of The Social Network. I don't know if that counts. That's not really a biopic, but
Well, if somebody has one in mind, please let us know.
when you go into a biopic, you expect there to be a great, iconic central performance, which we get from Timothée Chalamet. But this film is generous enough to give us 3 really good supporting performances. So the first one I'll bring up is Ed Norton. So he plays Pete Seeger, and there's such like a gentle humanism to this performance. I think the film really sold this idea that Pete Seeger thought that folk music was going to save the world, and the idea that Bob Dylan could get as popular and as wide-ranging an influence as he did, that was the key to getting folk music to the popular airwaves and like saving the world in a certain sense, because it was about like civil rights and peace and love and etc. At a certain point, when Dylan wants to deviate from from that thing, it becomes like a very difficult position for Pete Seeger, because he has to look at this dream he had, this idea he had, and say goodbye to it.
Yeah.
And I think that Ed Norton, in addition to like being a spitting image of Pete Seeger, is able to convey that whole dramatic tension very well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is visually also butted up against the assassination of JFK, which I found to be very interesting, because you almost see Bob Dylan's change happen during this exact time period, where it's almost like Bob Dylan learns that peace and love and a calm voice isn't going to get what is needed. It seems in the movie that there's an implication that it lit something in Bob Dylan that changed his progression of his career, maybe.
His guitar player says this too. He was like, what? More folk music? They just shot Malcolm X. Like, talking about how like we need to get more pissed off everybody.
I really liked how that transition is being told to us through what is happening contextually at the time. Pete Seeger is so married to folk music. It's interesting to see how much he clings to it over the course of the movie, and his relevance over the course of the movie is waning a bit, because we have this scene where he is on TV and he's strumming his banjo, and Bob Dylan was supposed to come in to be his guest on the episode, and he didn't show up. He explains it to the crowd. Then he gets this other guy to come in, which is a hilarious moment.
Like he's drinking a little too much. And Pete Seeger's like a little conservative, not in his politics, but just in the way he conducts himself. He's family friendly. So he starts drinking. At the same time, too, he brings an electric guitar. He's playing electric blues, which is like heresy to the Newport people. So it just was not his vibe.
Yeah.
Not pointing a finger so much, but there was a puritanical structure with the way thinking about folk music was. That's like, you have to do exactly this, and that's what makes you a folk musician, and you have to continually do that. And I could see how that could feel very entrapping to somebody.
Yeah.
Elle Fanning is fantastic in this movie.
She is so fantastic.
And I think you could argue that if the music is not the heart of the film, then she is, because she has this tremendously forlorn look that she has with Bob Dylan. There's a magnetism to Dylan, and there's a magnetism to his performance and who he is as a person, that you understand why she's so drawn to him, why like she just can't quit him, so to speak. At the same time, she has incoming realizations that Dylan is not good for her.
Yeah.
At the same time that so many people are looking at Dylan with like, oh my gosh, he's so wonderful, he's God incarnate. She's looking at him with the sadness of seeing like, this is a person that I am losing.
But I also think that's why he's so drawn to her, because she doesn't value fame and fortune. She values the personal connection and the relationship. She wants to know about his past. He seems unwilling to give too many details, and that's like a conflict in the relationship.
Yeah, and what he says about the past, I think it's in the trailer, about how people make up their past. They remember what they want to. It's not like that's not true. It's just that he's using that as this philosophical excuse to not talk about his past.
Hence the assholeness of Bob Dylan.
And then finally, to round out these supporting performances, we have Monica Barbaro, who is playing Joan Baez. Joan Baez, another fantastic songwriter, playing a real person in the same way. So we have that same fine line here of like, we don't want this to be an SNL impression. So she's so convincing as Joan Baez, but at the same time, she is so believable when she's singing and playing the guitar. But at the same time, same with Elle Fanning, is her dialogue scenes with Chalamet are quite good too. She has that line that we've been talking about where she says, "You're kind of an Bob."
And he is an to her.
Yeah.
Like constantly criticizing her music and saying, she almost sings too pretty.
And then he says something about how they're like oil paintings in a dentist office or something. I thought she was just great in the film.
Yeah.
I would not even be able to pick between the two of them, to be honest with you, which one was better.
So you ready to go to grades?
Yes.
You give it an A+.
I'm going to give it an A-. Like, dude, just roast me in the comments. I know a lot of people that like this movie. I know some film critics that are like, yeah, this movie's fine, but it's like incredibly boring. Nothing happens. Like, if you're one of those people, I want to hear from you, because I don't think I'm being objective right now, but I am going to watch this movie till the end of time. I thought that it was so much fun. I thought it just reinforced everything that I love about this songwriter, and that's all I have to say.
I'm glad you mentioned that specifically, because we recently did our review on Maria. In that review, we came to find out through the comments that people who are like very big fans of Maria Callas were not as impressed by the movie. And so I find that very interesting, because I think going into a Bob Dylan film...
Yeah, I had a preconceived notion of something I wanted to see.
Yeah. And so you kind of got what you wanted. So, I mean, obviously this is a very different movie than Maria is. There's this line between like how much you know of somebody and how that influences how you perceive how they're portrayed in a film. And so I find that very interesting between these two films. From my perspective, coming in and not really knowing Bob Dylan as a person, I mean, I knew about his change in music styles, and I knew how that was a big thing through you.
Cool for you too, because like I know you hear a lot of Bob Dylan when I play it. You like Bob Dylan, but when he's writing this song, you're like, oh, that's off this album. It's in this context. And oh, that song is when he went electric, and he did that because of this. So that must have been cool.
Yeah, so all that context was built in me. So I gained so much from this film that other people, I think, who know Bob Dylan so well probably didn't gain, and maybe that's why they see it as more like a hollow affair. But I thought it was rich in its themes and like a bunch of different things, and the music I thought was great. And I don't know, I had a great time. I give it an A- as well.
Roast us.
Roast us. Fine. I don't care. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the characters, we only get so much of them, but I love what we got. Like, especially Elle Fanning, how she doesn't want to be on this circus, and she realizes that at the end, and she walks away. When they give the words at the end about everybody and how they went through their lives, I was like, where is she?
Yeah.
Where is she? I wanted to know more about her. I cared about her. So the movie didn't give me that at the end. I went and looked up myself, but they end up remaining close friends until her passing in 2011, I read. So for what it's worth, you know, they obviously still had some sort of relationship. It was just nice learning more about Bob Dylan's life in this particular time period. You had mentioned coming out of the theater that, oh, they could before this, where in 9 years they bring Timothée Chalamet back and they just do another portion of Bob Dylan's life.
They do like 10 years from now, you could do the 70s with Blood on the Tracks and Desire, and then you could take another 20 years and do Time Out of My Mind and Love and Theft. The whole like resurrection era of Bob Dylan. Later Bob Dylan is maybe my favorite Bob Dylan, like 1997 onward, the sad old guy stuff and just like him just crushing the blues all the time. Oh, it's just so I hope everyone enjoyed this review, which is a review of ADHD,
yes,
and of what I think of Bob Dylan, and some sort of referendum on my own ability to criticize film. And here we are.
Did we actually do a good job?
This is a good
one.
I have no idea.
All right, and that's it for our review of A Complete Unknown. A Complete Unknown is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, be sure to go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.